Lingue originali.
La letteratura in lingua inglese, tedesca e francese è su Caffè Italia a Lingue Originali. Bentrovati da Dario Albertini. 3 episodi ogni settimana, tanto sul canale streaming quanto su quello Spotify e YouTube, per raccontarvi in lingua italiana gli autori, alcuni, e leggere di questi autori passi tratti dalle loro opere, ma nella lingua nella quale queste opere sono state scritte. Parliamo di Jonathan Coe, che è il protagonista di questo periodo negli episodi che stiamo dedicando alla letteratura inglese letta in lingua inglese. È uno scrittore che, a prescindere da questo nostro ciclo di trasmissioni, mi piace molto perché Jonathan Coe è una persona spiritosa, che sa anche esprimere della tenerezza e soprattutto sa romanzare la vita di tutti i giorni. In particolare in Middle England Jonathan Coe porta in una saga familiare la storia dell'Inghilterra nel periodo fra il 2010 e il 2018. Brexit sicuramente vi dice qualcosa, se ne parla tutti i giorni. Mentre produciamo questo episodio si è appena conclusa la visita del presidente Biden in Irlanda del Nord. Sapete, altrimenti vi dico io, c'è una disputa sui dazi doganali perché l'Irlanda del Nord rispetto alla Brexit non è stata molto contenta, come anche la Scozia, giusto per fare degli esempi. Il clima dell'Inghilterra di quel periodo, ma anche di questo, lo potete conoscere, così come lo sto conoscendo io, attraverso le pagine di Middle England. Questo è il 7° episodio dedicato al romanzo e fra poco linea e microfono andranno a Marco Piovaz per la lettura. Torno a darvi dei cenni su Jonathan Coe, che nasce insegnante di poesia, pensate, all'Università di Warwick, ma è anche un musicista, semiprofessionista, ma musicista, correttore di bozze, giornalista e scrittore. Non sarà un caso se è considerato uno dei più grandi talenti della narrativa inglese. In fondo si distingue per l'originalità dei suoi racconti e per l'acuto spirito che indirizza alle contraddizioni della società inglese. Nel prossimo episodio, nell'introduzione al prossimo episodio, vi darò anche dei cenni su altri libri. Per quanto riguarda Middle England, che è alla nostra attenzione in questo periodo, lo trovate in lingua italiana in libreria, pubblicato da Feltrinelli. 7° estratto dalla voce di Marco Piovaz, e noi ci sentiamo dopo.
When Doug received an email from Downing Street press office announcing a raft of new appointments, he did some Googling. The name of the new coalition government's Deputy Assistant Director of Communications had caught his eye. Nigel Ives. There had been a boy called Ives at school, Timothy Ives. And while it wasn't such an unusual surname, it had set off a distant memory. Benjamin had once told him that in a moment of weakness, some years earlier, he had accepted Timothy Ives' friend request on Facebook and had discovered, among other things, that he had a son. Wasn't the name Nigel? That too could be a coincidence. But in any case, Doug emailed Nigel and Nigel emailed back. And when they met for an off-the-record chat at the cafe next to Temple Tube Station, the first thing Nigel said to him was, "I think you were at school with my father, Timothy, at King William's in Birmingham back in the 70s? That's right. He was terrified of you." "Really?" said Doug. "But he also worshipped you." "Really?" said Doug. "He was convinced you despised him." "Really?" said Doug, remembering that this was definitely true. Timothy Ives had been a short, runtish boy, and the older boys in the school, especially Harding, had been ruthless in exploiting him, constantly requiring him to run errands and do favours. How is he anyway? What's he up to? He has become rather a successful proctologist. Don't you say? I'm sure you don't suffer from hemorrhoids, Douglas, but if you did, my father could ease your pain. I shall certainly bear that in mind. But I dare say you didn't come here to talk about your piles. I don't have piles, and I wasn't talking about them. Quite. No, I came here because I wanted to raise the possibility that you and I might begin a warm and mutually beneficial relationship. If the Tories and the Lib Dems can form a coalition and find ways to work together, then, who knows, maybe so can we. Indeed. You are talking about the spirit of the age, Douglas. A complete break with the old two-party system. No more petty antagonism, just common ground and cooperation. It's a very exciting time to be entering politics. Doug looked at Nigel and wondered how old he might be. Straight out of university by the looks of it. His cheeks were pale, rosy, and looked like they never needed to be shaved. His dark suit and tie were smart but characterless, like his side-parted hair. His expression was bland, his tone of voice permanently enthusiastic but otherwise inscrutable. He could only be in his early 20s. But how are things really shaping up at number 10? Doug asked. You've got two very different parties here, with very different agendas. It can't last for long, can it? Nigel smiled. Dave and Nick and the team respect you as a commentator, Douglas. But we know it's your job to look for trouble. You're not going to find it here. Dave and Nick have their differences, of course, but at the end of the day, they're just two regular guys who want to get on with the job. Regular guys. Exactly. Regular guys who just happened to go to unbelievably expensive private schools before shimmying up the political greasy pole. Exactly. You see how much they have in common? Wasn't it brilliant watching them that first day together in the Rose Garden, larking about for the cameras, having a laugh? So there's no ideological divide. Nigel frowned for a moment. Well, Dave went to Eton and Nick went to Westminster. That's a pretty big difference, I can see that. He soon brightened, however. But honestly, Douglas, or can I call you Doug now? Sure, why not? Honestly, Doug, you should hear the bands between them at the cabinet table. Hear what? Sorry? The banter. Bands. Banter. The jokes, the laughs, the Mickey talking. Believe me, I've heard a lot of this kind of stuff, especially at uni, and we're talking top banter here. Let me get this straight. You're referring to cabinet discussions? Absolutely. So a few days ago, there were thousands of young people out on the streets of London protesting about huge rises in tuition fees, which Nick Clegg promised not to support and is now supporting, and in the meantime the new Chancellor is announcing massive cuts to public spending, and you tell me that basically this is all being driven by banter. Nigel hesitated. He seemed nervous about how his next remark would be received. Doug, don't take this the wrong way, but I think this is a generational thing. We are talking about a generational divide. You and your friends and my dad were brought up in a certain way. You're used to an antagonistic form of party politics. But Britain's moved on. The old system's broken now. May the 6th showed us that. On May the 6th, Britain was asked to choose a new direction, and the people spoke with a loud, unanimous, decisive voice. And what they said could hardly have been clearer. They said, "We don't know." He smiled pleasantly in response to Doug's bewildered silence. "We don't know," he repeated, shrugging and spreading his hands. 2 years ago, the world experienced a terrible financial crisis, and nobody knows how to deal with it. Nobody knows the way forward. I call it radical indecision, the new spirit of our times. And Nick and Dave embody it perfectly. In a mechanical response, Doug nodded his agreement, but deep down he couldn't tell whether Nigel was joking or not. It was to become an increasingly familiar feeling over the next few years.
Ancora una volta grazie a Marco Piovaz. Marco è un docente di storia, lingua e letteratura inglese a Torino. Grazie per questa settima lettura. Sapete che in conclusione degli episodi dedicati alla letteratura inglese e tedesca, chi vi parla vi ricorda gli altri appuntamenti con Lingue Originali. Quello con Nadia Meroni, per chi ci ascolta in diretta il sabato per la lingua tedesca, e quello con Barbara Marchand della domenica per la letteratura in lingua francese. L'episodio di Barbara Marchand, che poi è l'ideatrice di Lingue Originali, è gestito, curato, condotto integralmente dalla nostra Barbara, che fa l'introduzione in lingua italiana e poi vi legge qualcosa in francese, mentre per quanto riguarda gli episodi dedicati all'inglese e al tedesco trovate me, Dario Albertini, per facilitare la lettura, l'ascolto, la comprensione a chi magari non ha tutta questa dimestichezza con la lingua inglese. Lingue Originali, vi ho detto quali sono i giorni di diffusione, l'orario è sempre quello, le ore 22. Dove? Su Caffè Italia, dove anche in inglese, tedesco e francese, lo sapete, ci piace tanto raccontarvi storie.
Lingue Originali.